The first snow of November drifted across the mountains long before sunrise, covering the wagon trails leading into Silver Creek, Montana territory. By noon, the town looked as though winter had claimed it weeks ahead of schedule. Chimneys poured gray smoke into the pale sky, horses stamped impatiently outside the saloon, and shopkeepers hurried to finish their business before another storm rolled over the ridge. Just after 2 o'clock, a lone stagecoach creaked into town. The passengers climbed down one by one until only a single young woman remained inside. She stepped onto the frozen street carrying a worn leather suitcase that looked almost too heavy for her. Her dark wool coat had collected patches of snow during the journey, and although exhaustion lined her face, she held her shoulders straight. Her name was Clara Bennett, 26 years old, widowed before her 25th birthday. Everything she owned fit inside the suitcase resting beside her boots. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat politely. "Silver Creek," he said. "End of the line." Clara thanked him with a quiet smile. Moments later, the coach disappeared into the white landscape, leaving her alone in a town she'd never seen before. She looked around. The main street was busy enough, yet nobody paid much attention to her. Miners crossed toward the boarding house, ranch hands argued outside the feed store, and children chased one another through fresh snow without noticing the stranger standing near the hitching rail. Clara took a slow breath. This was supposed to be the place where she started over. Instead, it already felt like another place that had no room for her. She entered the nearest boarding house. The owner barely looked up. "Full. I only need a room for a few nights." "Still full." She thanked him anyway. The second boarding house gave the same answer. The third wasn't any different. By late afternoon, the temperature had fallen sharply. Snowflakes drifted heavier now. Clara stood beneath the awning of the general store, rubbing warmth into her hands. She counted the coins hidden inside her coat pocket. Enough for perhaps 3 simple meals. Not enough for another journey. The realization settled quietly. There would be no turning back. Sheriff Thomas Grady, a broad-shouldered man with a silver badge dulled by years of wear, stepped onto the boardwalk carrying a sack of supplies. He noticed the young woman standing alone. "You waiting on someone?" "No, sir." "You got family here?" She shook her head. "Looking for work." The sheriff glanced toward the darkening sky. "Storms coming before nightfall." "I know. You'll want shelter." "I would if I could find any." He studied her for a moment. There wasn't much he could do. Silver Creek wasn't cruel. It was simply full of people carrying burdens of their own. "I'll ask around," he finally said. "It may take time." "Thank you." He nodded once before continuing down the street. Clara watched him disappear between the falling snow. Across the road, the steady ringing of hammer against iron echoed from a blacksmith shop. Inside, sparks burst through the dim light as Elias Harper shaped a glowing horseshoe against his anvil. At 38, Elias had spent nearly half his life behind the forge. Years of hard work had broadened his shoulders and roughened his hands until they looked carved from oak. When he finally stepped outside to cool the metal, he noticed the woman sitting alone beneath the general store awning. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking anyone for help. She simply sat beside her suitcase, staring toward the mountains as snow slowly gathered around her boots. Something about the quiet determination in her posture reminded him of people who had already survived their worst day. He crossed the street. "You waiting for somebody?" She looked up. "I was. And? They never came." He nodded as though he understood more than she had said. "I'm Elias Harper. Clara Bennett. You looking for work?" "I'll do almost anything." He glanced toward the forge behind him. "I run the blacksmith shop. I spend most days working iron. My house is attached to the back." She listened carefully. "My nephew and I manage well enough." He hesitated before continuing. "But the house hasn't felt much like a home since my brother passed." He wasn't asking for sympathy, only stating a fact. "I need someone who can cook, keep things in order, and make sure the place doesn't fall apart while I'm working. I can do that. It's honest work. I only pay modest wages. I don't need much. You'd have your own room." Clara looked toward the blacksmith shop, then back at the nearly empty street. No dramatic speeches. No impossible promises. Just a chance. "I'd be grateful." Elias picked up her suitcase before she could protest. "Come on." The Harper home sat directly behind the forge. It was sturdy but worn. The porch leaned slightly to one side. One shutter hung crooked. Inside, everything was clean enough, yet carried the unmistakable feeling of people surviving rather than living. A teenage boy looked up from the kitchen table. "This is Noah," Elias said. "My nephew." 14-year-old Noah barely acknowledged Clara. "She's staying here?" "For now." Noah returned to carving a piece of wood with his pocket knife. Without another word, he stood and disappeared into his room. Clara watched him leave. "He doesn't seem happy. He lost his father last spring. He doesn't trust change." "I don't blame him." Her room was small. A single bed. A washstand. One narrow window overlooking the snowy hills. It was the nicest place she'd slept in for months. That evening she unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses. A family Bible. Several sewing needles wrapped inside cloth. One faded photograph of her late husband. She placed the picture inside the drawer instead of on top. Some memories were easier to carry when they stayed out of sight. The following morning, Clara woke before sunrise. Without being asked, she swept the kitchen floor, patched a torn curtain, organized the pantry shelves, and prepared a simple breakfast from the ingredients she found. When Elias entered, he stopped in surprise. The kitchen smelled of fresh biscuits. The table had already been set. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know. But it needed doing." He smiled quietly. Noah entered moments later. He looked around the room. Nothing was different. Yet somehow, everything felt different. He ate breakfast without complaint. That alone surprised Elias. The days passed. Clara repaired loose buttons on Elias's work shirts. She mended Noah's winter coat without mentioning the torn sleeve. She scrubbed windows until sunlight reached corners of the house that had stayed dark for years. No speeches. No attempts to earn gratitude. She simply worked. One evening, Noah returned from school to find his favorite history book carefully repaired after its broken spine had finally given way. He turned several pages before looking toward the kitchen. "You fixed it?" Clara looked up from peeling potatoes. "It deserved another few years." Noah stared at the book for a long moment. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "Thank you, Miss Bennett." Clara smiled. "It was my pleasure." Neither of them realized it. But that small sentence was the first crack in the wall Noah had built around his heart since losing his father. Outside, snow continued to fall over Silver Creek. Inside the Harper house, winter no longer felt quite so cold. By the middle of December, winter had settled over Silver Creek with a quiet determination. The blacksmith's chimney burned from dawn until dusk, sending ribbons of smoke into the pale sky while snow buried fences, wagon wheels, and empty fields beyond town. Most folks hurried through the streets with their collars turned high, eager to escape the biting wind. Inside the Harper home, however, life had found a comfortable rhythm. Each morning began with the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread. Elias worked at the forge, Noah attended school before helping in the shop, and Clara quietly kept the little house running without ever asking for praise. The silence that had once filled every room had slowly been replaced by ordinary sounds. A kettle whistling, Noah laughing at something Elias muttered under his breath, and Clara humming softly while she stitched worn blankets by the fire. For the first time in years the house felt lived in. One evening, as darkness settled early across the valley, Clara stepped outside to gather firewood stacked near the stable. The wind howled harder than usual. Snow whipped across the yard in thick waves. Then she heard it. A horse. Not running. Struggling. She froze. Another sound followed. A weak groan carried by the wind. Without hesitation, she grabbed the lantern hanging beside the back door and followed the sound beyond the fence line. Nearly 50 yards from the house, a bay horse staggered through the snow before collapsing onto one knee. Beside it lay a man. His coat was soaked with blood. One hand still clutched the reins, though he no longer had the strength to move. Clara hurried toward him. "Can you hear me?" The stranger opened his eyes for only a moment. "They're still coming?" Then he lost consciousness. She quickly noticed the wound. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. She looked toward town. No lights. No one nearby. If she left him here to fetch help, he would freeze before she returned. Dragging a full-grown man through deep snow was nearly impossible. Clara untied the horse, wrapped the stranger's arm around her shoulders, and slowly guided both man and horse back toward the blacksmith shop. By the time she reached the yard, Elias was already running toward her. "What happened?" "I found him outside the fence." Elias looked at the blood. "Inside." "No." Together they carried the unconscious stranger into the forge where the warmth from the furnace filled the room. Noah stared in disbelief. "Is he dead?" "Not yet," Elias answered. Clara immediately heated water while Elias carefully cut away the torn sleeve. The wound was ugly. The bullet had passed clean through, but infection would come quickly if it wasn't treated. Clara cleaned the injury with steady hands. The stranger never cried out. He remained unconscious through the entire night. Morning arrived beneath heavy gray clouds. The stranger finally opened his eyes. He looked around the unfamiliar room before instinctively reaching for the revolver lying on the nearby table. Elias had unloaded it. "You won't need that right now," he said calmly. The man relaxed slightly. "My name's Elias Harper. This is Clara Bennett. My nephew Noah." The stranger hesitated before answering. "Jonah Reed." Nothing more. No explanation. No questions. Only his name. Over the next several days, Jonah recovered slowly. He spoke little. Whenever anyone asked where he'd come from, he simply answered, "East." "Who shot you?" "I don't know." "Why?" "No idea." It was obvious he was lying. Even Noah could tell. One afternoon, while sharpening horseshoes outside the forge, Noah whispered to Elias, "He's hiding something." "I know. Shouldn't we tell Sheriff Grady?" Elias looked toward the workshop window where Clara was changing Jonah's bandage. "Maybe. But not until we know the whole story." Late that evening, Clara found Jonah sitting alone beside the forge fire. The room was quiet except for the crackling wood. "You don't trust us," she said gently. He stared into the flames. "I trust you more than I should." "Then tell me why someone shot you." For several moments he said nothing. Finally, "I wasn't always a drifter. I worked as a surveyor. Measured land. Marked property lines." Clara listened quietly. "Last month I discovered forged documents. Large ranch owners were stealing homesteads from settlers. They changed boundary maps. Stole hundreds of acres. I refused to sign the papers. So they tried to kill you?" Jonah nodded. "They don't want witnesses." Clara remained silent. The truth explained everything. His fear. His secrecy. The bullet wound. 3 days later, Silver Creek received unexpected visitors. 3 riders entered town shortly after noon. All wore heavy dusters despite the cold. None looked like travelers. They stopped first at the sheriff's office. Then the general store. Then the saloon. By evening, everyone had seen the reward poster nailed outside the post office. Wanted. Jonah Reed. $800 reward. Armed and dangerous. No explanation. No crime listed. Just the reward. $800. More money than many families earned in an entire year. People began whispering immediately. Some believed Jonah must be an outlaw. Others wondered why the poster said nothing about his crime. Sheriff Grady frowned when he read it. Something felt wrong. Legitimate warrants usually included details. This one didn't. Inside the Harper house, Noah burst through the door carrying the poster. "They're looking for him." Jonah's face turned pale. "They found me." Elias placed the poster on the table. "You know these men?" Jonah nodded slowly. "They work for Victor Langford." "The ranch owner?" "The richest man in 3 counties. He'll pay anything to keep those stolen deeds hidden." Silence settled over the room. Finally Noah spoke. "We should help you leave tonight." Jonah shook his head. "They'll follow. If I run, they'll come after everyone who helped me." The following afternoon, Clara visited the general store. Conversation stopped as soon as she entered. People watched her differently now. One customer quietly folded the wanted poster and slipped it into his coat. Another man asked the shopkeeper loud enough for everyone to hear, "Think Harper knows he's hiding an outlaw?" Clara said nothing. She paid for flour and coffee before walking home through the falling snow. Behind her, 2 strangers watched from across the street. One smiled. As she disappeared around the corner, he mounted his horse. "Now we know where he is." That night, long after darkness swallowed Silver Creek, Elias secured the workshop doors while Noah checked every window. The wind outside had grown strangely quiet. Too quiet. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. One. Then another. Then several more. They stopped just beyond the front gate. Lantern light appeared through the snow. Jonah slowly stood despite the pain in his shoulder. He looked toward the window. "They're here." Elias reached for his rifle. Noah extinguished every lamp except one. Clara stood silently beside the front door, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Outside. A voice broke the silence. "We know you're in there, Reed. Bring him out. And nobody else gets hurt." The entire house fell still. Winter itself seemed to stop breathing. The voice outside carried through the frozen night with unsettling calm. "We know Jonah Reed is inside. Bring him out, and the rest of you can go back to your lives." Inside the Harper house no one moved. Only the fire crackled softly in the stove. Jonah lowered his head. "I won't let them hurt you because of me." He reached for his coat. Elias stepped in front of him. "No. They're after me. They're threatening my home," Elias replied. "That's different." Jonah opened his mouth to argue, but Elias had already picked up his rifle. Not with anger. With quiet resolve. Clara looked at both men before speaking. "Violence is exactly what they expect. So we won't give it to them." Outside, another voice shouted impatiently. "You've got 1 minute." Noah quietly slipped toward the back door. Elias noticed. "Where are you going?" The 14-year-old looked back. "To get help. It isn't safe. It isn't safe staying here either." Before anyone could stop him, Noah disappeared into the darkness. Snow swallowed him almost immediately. Outside the front gate, 3 riders waited beneath the dim glow of their lanterns. Their leader, a scar-faced man named Cole Mercer, adjusted the fur collar around his neck. He had spent years doing the dirty work wealthy men preferred not to dirty their own hands with. Behind him, 2 armed companions kept their rifles resting across their saddles. Cole called again. "Last chance. Hand him over." The front door opened. Elias stepped onto the porch alone. The wind lifted his coat as snow drifted across the yard. "I'm listening." Cole smiled. "We're collecting a fugitive." "I don't see one." "You've been hiding Jonah Reed." "I've been sheltering an injured man." "Same thing." "No." Elias folded his arms. "Not even close." Inside, Clara watched through the window while Jonah stood behind her. "You should let me go." She turned toward him. "Do you honestly believe they'll leave once they have you?" Jonah said nothing. Because he already knew the answer. If Victor Langford wanted witnesses erased, anyone who had helped Jonah was already marked. Across town, Noah sprinted through the snow as hard as his legs would carry him. His lungs burned. His boots slipped against the frozen road. Finally he reached the small white church near the center of Silver Creek. He grabbed the thick rope hanging beside the entrance, then pulled with all his strength. The church bell exploded into the silent night. One deep ring. Then another. Then another. The sound echoed across every street, every stable, every cabin. Lights began appearing in windows throughout town. Doors opened. People stepped outside wondering what disaster had struck. Sheriff Thomas Grady was among the first. He looked toward the Harper property. Then toward Noah. The boy pointed without speaking. The sheriff understood immediately. Back at the Harper home, Cole Mercer grew impatient. He raised his rifle. "If you won't move, we will." The riders nudged their horses forward. Just then, a new sound rolled across the valley. Church bells. Cole frowned. What in the world? Another sound followed. Footsteps. Lots of them. Lanterns appeared through the falling snow. Men, women, farmers, storekeepers, miners, carpenters, families who had spent years building lives together in Silver Creek. One by one, they quietly gathered near the Harper property. Nobody carried hatred on their faces. Only determination. Sheriff Grady walked to the front of the crowd. His deputy stood beside him. "So," the sheriff said calmly, "looks like you've got quite an audience." Cole's confidence faded. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns my town. We're here for a wanted man." Sheriff Grady unfolded the reward poster from his coat pocket. "I've read this thing 3 times. No crime. No judge's signature. No territorial seal." He looked directly at Cole. "Funny sort of warrant." Cole's jaw tightened. "We don't answer to you." "No," the sheriff replied. "But you answer to the law." Jonah slowly stepped onto the porch beside Elias. The townspeople watched quietly. Some had believed the rumors. Some hadn't. Now everyone waited. Jonah reached inside his coat. Several rifles immediately lifted. "Easy," Sheriff Grady warned. Jonah carefully removed a thick leather envelope. "I've been running because of these." He handed them to the sheriff. Inside were land surveys, original property maps, signed ownership records, and letters proving Victor Langford had bribed officials to redraw settlement boundaries. Entire families had been cheated out of their farms. The sheriff read several pages before looking back toward Cole Mercer. "So that's what this is." Cole realized the truth had finally surfaced. He slowly reached for his revolver. Unfortunately for him, nearly 20 rifles were already aimed in his direction. He stopped. Sheriff Grady's voice remained steady. "I wouldn't." For several long seconds nobody moved. Finally Cole lowered his hand. He understood the odds. Without another word he turned his horse around. His two companions followed. The three riders disappeared into the snowy darkness. None of them looked back. Within weeks, territorial investigators arrived in Silver Creek. Victor Langford's ranch offices were searched. Hidden records matched every document Jonah had protected. Dozens of stolen homesteads were returned to their rightful owners. Langford was arrested before spring. For the first time in months, Jonah Reed slept without fear. When the snow finally began melting, Jonah prepared to leave. His horse had recovered. So had his shoulder. He stood beside the blacksmith shop fastening his saddle when Clara approached. "You don't have to keep running anymore." "I know." "So where will you go?" He smiled. "Somewhere I can start over honestly. You gave up everything to protect strangers." She returned the smile. "So did you." Jonah tipped his hat to Elias. "You saved my life." Elias shook his hand firmly. "You saved a lot more than you realize." Noah grinned. "Try not to get shot again." Jonah laughed. "I'll do my best." Then he rode west beneath a bright spring sky until he disappeared beyond the hills. Life in Silver Creek slowly returned to normal. The forge stayed busy. Travelers came and went. Children played in the dusty streets once winter faded into memory. One evening, after closing the workshop, Elias found Clara repairing one of his work shirts on the porch. He sat beside her. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally he broke the silence. "When you first arrived, I thought I was giving someone a place to stay." He looked toward the house. "I was wrong." She waited quietly. "You gave this place back its heart." He turned toward her. "I don't want you staying because you need somewhere to go. I want you to stay because this has become your home." His voice softened. "And because I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you." Clara looked at him, the warm light from the house reflecting in her eyes. Months ago, she had arrived carrying nothing but one worn suitcase and memories she thought would never stop hurting. Now she looked toward the little home behind the forge. Toward Noah, who was laughing while trying to teach the old barn dog a useless trick. Toward the life she had never expected to find. She smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." Elias slipped a simple silver band onto her finger. Not expensive. Not perfect. But made by his own hands. It was worth more than gold. A few days later, Noah quietly climbed onto a ladder above the front porch. He nailed a freshly forged horseshoe over the doorway. Clara stepped outside and looked up. "What's that for?" she asked. Noah shrugged with an embarrassed smile. "They say it brings good luck." He hesitated before adding, "But I don't think we need luck anymore. I think." He looked around the little home. "We've already found what we were missing." Clara reached over and hugged him. For the first time since losing his father, Noah hugged someone back without hesitation. As the evening sun settled behind the Montana mountains, laughter drifted from the Harper home, blending with the steady rhythm of Elias's forge. The long winter that had begun with loneliness and uncertainty had ended with something far stronger. Not because fate had been kind, but because ordinary people had chosen courage over fear, compassion over suspicion, and truth over silence. And in the quiet little town of Silver Creek, that choice became a story people would remember for generations.